Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday, and welcome into a new edition of the Patriots Beat podcast here on the CLNS Media Podcast Network and on Patriots Press Pass. I'm Evan Lazar, joined as always by Alex Barth, and we are going to take your questions today. So as we get some people in here, as we get some questions in the chat, we will discuss some of the latest buzz around the Patriots vacant offensive coaching staff. You don't even have to say coordinator anymore, Alex. You can just say the whole coaching staff is vacant
right
at the moment, and we can start there, and then we can talk whatever you guys want to talk about. This is essentially your agenda to set, so go ahead and drop those questions in the chat. We'll start the conversation here, though, Alex. I think what has spearheaded a lot of the talk this week about the Patriots offensive coaching staff was Mike Reese over the weekend in his notes column saying that he is hearing from league personnel that the Patriots and Bill Belichick could move Matt Patricia over to offense. So the Patriots in Reese's intel would have a former defensive coordinator and a former special teams coordinator running their offense. It's getting to the point where if all of these things are actually true, and this is where the Patriots are headed with Patricia and Joe Judge and Nick Caley and Troy Brown kind of running this ship offensively, it's getting harder and harder not to press the panic button on this being the direction of the team right now.
Yeah, so my colleague Scott Zolak at 98.5 laid this out today of what the coaching staff could look like. Excuse me. Nick Caley as being promoted from tight ends coach to quarterbacks coach and passing game coordinator. Joe Judge is the tight ends coach, co-running game coordinator. Matt Patricia is also a co-running game coordinator. He'd be the offensive line coach. And then you have Troy Brown coaching wide receivers. I just will throw out Matt Patricia's first jobs, plural, in New England. He was an offensive assistant in 2004 and then the assistant offensive line coach in 2005 before becoming the linebackers coach in 2006. So it's not like he's never coached offense, right?
It's just been two decades.
Yeah, I texted you about this yesterday, and if anybody in the chat has it, I really couldn't. I wasn't going to dedicate hours to searching. I probably could have tried harder, but I couldn't find it in my searching. Has a coach ever been both an offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator, like defined at different parts in their career? I'm not talking about a head coach who called offense and defense. I'm talking about a coach who was titled offensive coordinator and then titled defensive coordinator in two separate stints. And that sounds alarming. Look, I think that it would be interesting. I think there's some unique advantages in that in terms of self-scouting point of view. A defensive coordinator is going to know better than a lifelong offensive coach what the other defensive coordinator is thinking. That's why the Patriots rotate their staff around so much. Josh McDaniels started on defense, right? Before he coached offense. That being said, like fully dedicated, I don't know how that would work. But if anybody's going to try that, if it hasn't happened before, and again, maybe it has, I couldn't find it, but feel free to correct me. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If anybody's going to try it, I would think it would be Bill.
Yeah, it's funny because you always fall back on, this is Bill freaking Belichick we're talking about, right? Bill is such a proven commodity, is even selling it short. I don't even know what other word to use besides just the greatest of all time, that you think everything that he does is probably going to find a way of working itself out. But at the same time, I think what concerns me the most about this approach is that you got a lot, again, same as with the defensive side of the ball in some ways, you have a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right? Who's the guy that's actually running the ship offensively? Because if it's Matt Patricia's the O-line coach / run game coordinator and Nick Caley's the quarterbacks coach / pass game coordinator, and maybe Caley's the one that's actually calling the plays, and Joe Judge is in there too, overseeing everything and coaching a position, coaching tight ends, coaching wide receivers, whatever the case may be. Who is actually in charge on the offensive side of the ball? And if you're the Patriots, the last thing that you want is Mac Jones to have a million different opinions thrown at him, right? You don't want the quarterback, especially in his second year, to be sitting there and saying, well, Joe Judge just told me this. Now Matt is telling me that, and Nick is calling this on game day. What am I thinking? Where are we? What are we doing? The lack of organization, I think, is more of a concern than maybe football brain power. if you will, right? Like I think that those three guys have a lot of football experience and knowledge, but at the end of the day, you have to have one head chef. And right now, it feels like on both sides of the ball, they got a bunch of sous chefs, but they have no idea who's actually in charge.
Yeah, at the end of the day, because you're going to have, and like you said, these guys are all great football minds. That means you're probably going to have varying opinions.
Right.
You need, and maybe it's Bill, but now Bill's wearing a lot of hats.
Right.
But you need somebody who, at the end of the day, is going to say definitively, this is what we're doing or this is what we're not doing.
Right.
And, who is at the end of that chain? And is it, kind of what's been reported on defense? It was one guy during the week and then one guy on Sundays. I just don't think that that's a healthy way to operate.
Right.
And now you're looking at maybe that being the case on offense as well. So
I want to talk about Bill O'Brien too, because there's been a lot of theories floated out there. This one on paper, for Bill O'Brien's sake, if you believe what you want to believe about him in terms of his interest of coming back to the NFL, and the Patriots obviously have a gigantic need for Bill O'Brien to come back to the NFL, but yet here we sit on February 17th, and this is still not done. He's still not the offensive coordinator of the Patriots. And according to Nick Saban, Saban is under the impression that he's coming back to Alabama. And there's really no...
Nick Saban says a lot of things. Although for what it's worth, Scott Zolak said today that he was very specific about how he said it. He doesn't believe Bill O'Brien will be the offensive coordinator for the Patriots.
Right.
He's sort of, I don't want to put words in his mouth. He sort of emphasized offensive coordinator. So I can't think of any other role he would come back in.
Me neither. Quarterbacks coach / associate head coach, maybe, or something like that, right?
Is associate head coach over
it would be
coordinator? Like, I don't know.
Right. I don't know either. From everything that I have gathered on Bill O'Brien, the impression that I get is that Bill Belichick has an unwritten rule that he doesn't like to poach coaches from other team staffs in general. And then you add onto that layer that it's poaching from his best friend in football, Nick Saban. And I think the number one thing here isn't money. It's not power or control of the roster. It's not that the Patriots don't want Bill O'Brien and Bill O'Brien doesn't want the Patriots. It's that Bill is not going to backstab Nick and take his offensive coordinator from him unless Nick Saban gives his sign of approval, and says to Bill O'Brien, go, right? You want to be in the NFL, you want to be with the Patriots, go. So until that happens, the Patriots are preparing for that not to happen, right? If in a couple weeks, in a month, Bill O'Brien and Nick Saban work something out and they're able to get over that hurdle, then the Patriots would welcome it with opening arms. But for now, they have to operate like it's not going to happen because there's no other options, right? There's really nothing else that they can do. But the Belichick-Saban connection has afforded a lot of really good things for the Patriots in the past, right? Like they have Mac Jones, partially because of that connection. They have Dante Hightower and Christian Barmore and Damian Harris and all these good players that have funneled from Alabama to the pro ranks with the Patriots, and not to mention all the coaching and schematic advantages that those two have mustered up together in the lab working together. But it's kind of an interesting conundrum and an interesting kind of contrast here, that it could be that relationship and the fact that they are best friends that is preventing Bill O'Brien from coming here and being the offensive coordinator for the Patriots.
Yeah, and that there's nothing you can do at that point, right? You got to wait, I guess, for his contract to run out or whatever. But so I'll go back to
sign a 2-year contract. So his contract runs out after this season. So if he so chooses, once he's a free agent, essentially in the coaching world, I guess he could potentially come back next year to the Patriots instead of this year.
I would think, though, if Bryce Young wins another Heisman, and assuming he stays healthy, there's probably a pretty good chance that happens.
Yeah.
He's going to get some very, very lucrative head coaching offers in the college ranks.
Yeah.
So, if you really want Bill O'Brien to be the offensive coordinator of the Patriots, or at any point, you got to root hard against Alabama this year. I'll just throw that out there. But thank you. Somebody reiterated my point in the comments, and I think it's a good one. I'll just go back to it since we're having this conversation. At this point, outside of Bill O'Brien, I'm not too worried about the offensive coordinator. To me, somebody, whether it's Judge or Kaylee, and those feel like the two leaders in the clubhouse. I mean, maybe Matt Patricia. Somebody's going to call the plays at this point. Somebody's going to call the plays. And again, outside of O'Brien, I don't think the offense is going to change. I don't think naming or bringing in an offensive coordinator changes much at this point. To me, the biggest question staffing-wise the Patriots have to answer right now, or not right now, but in the coming weeks, is a dedicated quarterbacks coach.
Yeah.
And I think Nick Caley's a good football mind, but somebody who's done it before. Right. Somebody who knows what they're doing. You can't play, and not Adam Gase. You can't play games with, I have to throw that disclaimer on there because it's true. Yeah. You can't play games with Mac Jones development. You just can't do it. You just cannot do it, or we're going to be sitting here in November talking about Phil Dracovic. So I like Mac. I do, but it's the nature versus nurture thing. With all these quarterbacks, and we saw it plain as day this year more than any other year. Trevor Lawrence is better than what we saw in Jacksonville, but the coaching staff around him was a mess. Mac, good player, but he had a good support staff. That helps too. So I think getting somebody to work one-on-one with Mac Jones, and I've seen people say, bringing Hoyer back as the backup quarterback, maybe that's part of it, and that certainly would help. But they need somebody working with Mac Jones, dedicated on working with Mac Jones.
Yeah, so there you have it. That's kind of resetting the table about the Patriots' latest on the offensive coaching staff. I heard those, I guess we can call them reports from Zolak. I know he always likes to throw things out there that his little birdies are telling him. I don't know what he wants us to call them, but we can call them reports about Bill O'Brien potentially being out. I wanted to bring up the Nick Saban, Bill Belichick thing because I think ultimately that's what's the biggest roadblock right now. And Bill O'Brien coming back to the Patriots has nothing to do with Bill O'Brien's lack of interest or the Patriots' lack of interest in Bill O'Brien, but more to do with the just coaching. I don't even know what the word is, just connections, right? And friendships and relationships. So that's the reset there. Dexter here can kick us off with this question, Alex, off the heels of what you were just talking about. The Patriots, we feel we both are in agreement that a quarterback's coach, an external hire most likely, is a right way to go. I actually would really like to see, if it's not Bill O'Brien, I would like to see Nick Caley get a chance to call the plays. If he is this rising star in their coaching ranks, we've seen this work before in other places where all of a sudden this guy that wasn't really getting a ton of attention comes out of the woodwork. Josh McDaniels is a terrific play caller and offensive mind, right? So if they feel that strongly about Nick Caley, I have no problems with them giving him a try this season, but he is not a quarterback's coach. He's a tight ends coach by trade. He's been a tight ends coach for a very long time. John Carroll University guy as well. So the Patriots have pretty good luck with those John Carroll U guys. So maybe that's another angle to this, but quarterbacks coach, kicking this off here on the Q&A, who are the best QB coaches out there that the Patriots could potentially make a pitch to and get? I threw out Jerry Shaplinski on Tuesday. He's a coaching free agent. I just mentioned that I don't think Bill Belichick is going to poach from other staffs if he doesn't have to. So a guy like Zach Robinson, unless he gets passed over out in Los Angeles, is an interesting name just because the Patriots drafted him and they have some history with him. Sean McVay and Bill Belichick have a little bit of a relationship too. So I suppose if Zach Robinson's not McVay's guy to replace Kevin O'Connell, then maybe that could happen. But who are some other names, if there are any that you have? I know we don't have to go down the Adam Gase route again. That's really the only other one I can think of. So is there anybody else I'm not thinking
of? Somebody in the comments brought it up on Tuesday, Josh McCown.
Yeah.
Would be a very interesting one. I think you look at just kind of the way I think Mac responded to Hoyer, and Brian Hoyer's not going to be the quarterback's coach. He's just not, because it's like you're taking a zero out of what he's getting paid, right? Quarterbacks coaches get paid a 10th of what backup quarterbacks do. And if they go to him and say, we want you to be the quarterback's coach, he'll say, well, are you going to make me essentially the highest paid coach on the staff, right? He's going to say, I'll be the backup again and I'll make my, whatever it was, close to $1 million. By the way, working, much better hours, all of that. So that all being said, I think the way Mac responded to Hoyer, I would look at recent retirements.
Yeah.
And guys that, like, I don't know.
Tom Brady. Not happening.
No. It would be a lower
profile guy. I knew that was
guy.
where this was going to go as soon as
no. I wasn't going to say Tom Brady. The one stretch I would put out there, I would call Drew Brees, because he is horrible on television. And I'm going to guess he's going to find that out sooner rather than later. if I'm him, I'm leaving on my own accord. I'm not waiting to get the boot. And I wonder if maybe because I think Breeze would have a lot to teach Mac. I
Right.
do. I think there's some similarity. That would be the ultimate stretch. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but
Yeah.
I think you look at Josh McCown. I don't know if Ryan Fitzpatrick's officially retired. If he'd want to get into coaching, he's another guy I'd look at. It's hard to tell sometimes with these like career backups because you don't know when they retire. They just sort of stay free agents. Like Matt Castle likes to joke, he never officially retired. So
Right.
I'd have to look at, what other backup quarterbacks have been in the league, but I would just kind of start calling those guys. Start calling the guys who retired in the last year or two, and try to find somebody maybe of a similar profile to Mac who could come in and work with them.
So
I know I'm missing an obvious name. I don't know if you have it. I feel like I'm missing somebody very obvious.
Shaplinski is the obvious name to me, right?
Well, no, I mean from that like retired quarterback.
Backup quarterback retired club. I'd have to think about it a little harder. I don't know if you missed it that many names. Brian Hoyer, you mentioned the salary discrepancy, right? In terms of being a backup quarterback versus being a coach. I'd also put in there the hours in the building and the huge difference that you have in terms of being a coach where during the season you could be pulling 120 hour work weeks during the football season. Players, especially a backup quarterback, not coming anywhere close to that, and you're making a fraction of the contract. A veteran minimum salary for a quarterback as tenured as Brian Hoyer has got to be over $1.2 million a year. He's not sniffing that as a quarterback's coach on Bill Belichick's staff. So for time reasons, for money reasons, as long as the Patriots are willing to give Brian Hoyer a roster spot, there's zero incentive whatsoever for Brian Hoyer to go into coaching. None. Because he's essentially a coach already, right? And I think that's the way that they're kind of looking at it in a way. I agree that they still need to get another guy in there to help with the coaching of the quarterbacks, but that's why I throw out a name like Shaplinski, just because he's been there, done that here in New England and is an easy transition, where Hoyer, I think, is really going to be a guy behind the scenes that's pulling a lot of strings with Mac Jones. He, at this point, probably knows the Patriots offensive playbook better than anybody in the building now that Josh McDaniels is gone. So I think that Hoyer is already kind of your de facto assistant quarterbacks coach, or however you want to put it. But that's not, that's not enough, right? That's not enough. I don't think still.
Right. I'll give you two more names here because I just pulled up the list of backup quarterbacks. Neither of these, excuse me, my voice today. Neither of these guys are officially retired, but I mean, Colt McCoy feels like could be done. He'd be an interesting one. And look, Chase Daniels got the best gig in football. His career earnings are like, I think he's been paid more for per pass attempt than any quarterback in NFL history. It's something like that. He's the real life Alex Moran, but he's 35. Maybe he walks away, and look, he was just with Herbert with the Chargers. That could be interesting. So yeah, I said I want Tim Jenkins as offensive coordinator. I love the way Tim views the game. I get Tim in here. Absolutely.
And
then we get PJ Walker to come in and be the backup. My guy PJ.
I love it. Tim Jenkins, we're calling you, man. Let's get him on the phone. I don't hate it. All right. Another name in the offensive coaching ranks. I do want to point out that there was an article written about Eric Bieniemy and Patrick Mahomes today with sourced information that has since been deleted off the website that it was posted on. So I think about 99.9% of what was written in that article was absolute crap. So don't go off of
what was it? I didn't see that.
The article was talking about a deteriorating relationship between Patrick Mahomes and Eric Bieniemy. And the fact is, the AFC Championship game, the way it ended, it's easy to create some sort of Hollywood story about how the two of them got into it, had a fight, had a disagreement about the play calls, that sort of thing. So Bieniemy was calling the plays last season for Kansas City with Andy Reid giving input, right? I think it's a similar setup for Steve Belichick with Bill, right? You call the plays 99% of the time, but when I want something in particular, or I want to correct something in particular, I speak my voice. And I think that's the same thing with Kansas City. Bieniemy's contract is expired. I don't think it's all sunshines and rainbows between him and Patrick Mahomes at the moment. I don't think that means that it's as fiery or as scripted as what that article that was deleted made it sound. But I don't think that relationship is as strong as it once was. I've talked about Bieniemy having a different a language barrier in football language, not an actual language, a football language barrier from the West Coast offense to an EP system. You're talking about an offense with West Coast concepts that will call plays by route, right? So they'll say Z slant, X this, Y that. The Patriots might call that play more conceptually, where they would use words to marry concepts so that the entire offense knows what they're doing. A very different play calling formula. So as much as I love Bieniemy, the football mind, and think that he could help the Patriots on that side of the ball, it would be a big learning curve for Bieniemy to then get himself used to and entrenched in the Patriots way of speaking from a football perspective. He's been with Andy Reid for a decade. I think he was with Andy Reid with the Eagles too. So
that sounds right. Yeah.
He's been with Andy Reid for a very, very long time and in a completely different offense.
Completely unrelated, but you mentioned the unfound reports. I just want to bring this up. Did you see the Marquise Brown stuff that's going around?
Yeah, the gaming stuff.
If he retires, 3 years in to be a video game player? I mean, the top of that draft with him and N'Keal, and then everybody else.
Terrible.
Unbelievable. Like, yeah. I look, as much as we rag on N'Keal, it's not like the Ravens got that pick right either. I just think that's unbelievable beyond N'Keal Harry and the Patriots, how that wide receiver draft played out.
Produced decently well. I think he has 2,000-yard receiving seasons in his first 3 years. So he definitely had close to 1,000 last year too.
And then if he walks away,
fair point. But
he's had 1,000-yard year. He had 580, 770, and he had 1,008 yards this past season.
Okay, so he's getting better and better each year too. On top of that, so
he is. The Ravens' offense is evolving, but anyway.
Fair enough. Let's talk about wide receivers. Let's talk about this scenario here painted about Braxton Berrios coming back to the Patriots. He's said publicly on Barstool Sports how much Bill Belichick liked him and had a tough time cutting him a few years ago. Berrios is now a free agent, UFA. Does feel like a Belichick move we're all looking at Chris Godwin and Allen Robinson and Michael Gallup, and he goes with the bargain buy and Braxton Berrios. Just to kick off a longer discussion about wide receivers and things like that. But how do you feel about Berrios?
I could see it. I mean, he's more of a slot guy in their system. I don't know that,
slot guy. Yeah.
Right. So he's splitting with Myers. And I don't hate the idea of getting somebody with a little more run after catch acumen to split time with Jacoby. That's where, when we talk about the draft, guys like Sky Moore come in.
Right.
But yeah, that can't be their premier move. That can't be I don't hate the concept. And I think as much as I love Gunner, if you're going to keep him as that fifth wide receiver, I think getting more offensive production out of your fifth wide receiver is going to make a difference. Now, if they add, a Chris Godwin and then draft like a Wan'Dale Robinson, now you really don't need Gunner to play receiver. And Gunner is the better returner, so you probably stick with him there. I don't hate the move in a bubble. I just don't know that it's the best asset allocation, right? No. Okay, so you slightly upgraded Gunner as your fifth wide receiver, who's essentially your fourth or fifth wide receiver at this point. If they pay him short money, whatever, it's fine. I think Berrios is a good player, but he doesn't add what they need, right? And I think it's beyond just adding guys. They have a bunch of guys who play wide receiver the way they want wide receiver played. Jacoby Myers, Kendrick Bourne, right? They need to go get somebody who adds to that group, who adds another dynamic to that group. Berrios is a good player for what he is, but I don't think he adds anything that they don't have right now.
Okay, so let's step it up a notch from Braxton Berrios, because I agree that he's just another wide receiver 3, maybe a wide receiver 4, and fits into that room as just another guy, like a lot of those guys in that room are. Christian Kirk, do you feel like he is – I think he's a step up from Berrios. I think we're kind of moving in the right direction here, but is he a guy that you would pay $10, $11 million to come in and be a target magnet in your offense, or are you imagining a little bit of a higher rung than Christian Kirk even still?
Yeah, I mean, his yards after catch per reception is 3 yards, or that's what it was last year. And it's
not a big their scheme doesn't set him up that much for yards after the catch. It was better earlier on in his career.
I was going to say it's decreased every single year. Went from 5.2 to 4.2 to 3.6 to 3.
Right. So, I think that he is somebody that has more potential in that regard. He was an explosive player in college, right? He was somebody that could really move and could return kicks too, return punts, things like that as well. So I think he is somebody that can create with the ball in his hands. I like the fit if they didn't have Kendrick Bourne and Jacoby Myers and all these other guys here already. You know, it's just tough because they're looking for something that will elevate the rest of that group. I think Christian Kirk is a little bit better than those players, but he's not worlds better that it changes the complexion of your offense. It just adds a little bit more juice to it potentially.
So here's the thing. We're basically with these players, with Berrios, with Kirk, Renfro's in the chat is not a free agent until next year.
Yeah.
We're basically talking about upgrades for Bourne and Myers. And while I think you can upgrade on Bourne and Myers, I don't think you need to. I think those are legitimate second and third wide receivers. The guy you need to find the upgrade for is Nelson Aguilar. Now, finding that kind of player, those kind of players are much rarer. They're more in demand. It's much harder to do. Somebody says Mike Williams in the chat. Michael Gallup.
I was bring him up next.
Like those are more. Juju's his own thing. I don't think he's a fit with the Patriots. But he is that kind of player. He is that mold, that prototype. That's what the focus needs to be. I think there is room to upgrade Jacoby. That I would almost do in the draft. That's where, again, you get to John Mechie, Wan'Dale Robinson, Sky Moore, Slade Bolden. Like there's a bunch of those guys in the draft. If you want to get another slot or upgrade the slot, you do that in the draft. They need to upgrade that X, that guy who's going to keep the defense honest, be a threat to take the top off. Christian Kirk's a good player. Braxton Berrios is a good player. That's not what they do, though. Like, you can't, because we did this last year, and you can't just look up all the receivers that have a rating 85 or better on Madden and throw the names out there and hope one of them sticks. You know, we're getting into a deeper philosophical football conversation here. I am of the belief, and Evan, I don't know if we've ever actually had this conversation. I'm really interested to hear what you think of this.
Yes.
I am of the belief that wide receiver is not a definitive position. Not anymore. It was at a point. And I think, and we've seen this at other positions too. I think outside receiver and slot receiver are two different positions. And there's guys who can play both. There's certainly guys who can play both, and there's value in that. But you know, take Cooper Kupp, right, versus, I don't know, AJ Brown. They both technically play the same position, but the skill sets are completely different. So I think as we go through this offseason, it's just something to keep in mind that last year you kind of could throw the names out there because they needed a full reset. And it was just get talent. Well, they've done that. Kendrick Bourne's immensely talented, and I think he's just scratching the surface.
Right.
You don't need to find an upgrade for Kendrick Bourne. I think I just said Kendrick Bourne. You need to find the upgrade for the other guy.
Yeah, so I think that they can upgrade the Z receiver spot too. The flanker, the offline guy, the Edelman, the now Jacoby Myers. Ideally, I do think that guy might be on the roster in Kendrick Bourne. I think that they could get a better, more explosive Z option out of Bourne.
I can see that.
He can learn the route tree and he can get more integrated into the offense next year. My concern with where they stand in that position is whether it's Jacoby Myers or Edelman or Welker or Brown or Branch, or go right on down the history of the position, that position is 100+ targets automatically. Like you walk off the bus and you're getting 100+ targets if you're the starting Z receiver in the Pats offense. So for that player to be such a high volume option, you need somebody that is an explosive playmaker, especially with their ball in the hands after the catch. And Jacoby Myers just doesn't bring that element. He can get open. I think he can create separation. I think he's a good route runner. I think he's extremely smart and football IQ heady, but he doesn't create big plays after the catch. And if they're going to continue to feed that role in the offense, and I think they probably will based off of Mac Jones's skill set, they're not all of a sudden going to become a vertical outside the numbers offense with Mac Jones as the quarterback. They have to be able to get more out of that Z spot. So I look at that spot. I don't know if Mike Williams is necessarily the answer. I like Mike Williams, a talented guy, but he's $18+ million a year on the free agent market. A lot of the time when you look at the history of the free agent market at that wide receiver position, paying a wide receiver in free agency does not work out very often, right? Guys like Mike Williams, guys like Michael Gallup, I think those guys that are going to be at the top of that market in March are guys I would personally stay away from for that reason. I don't know if they're great fits in what they need. I also don't know if they're going to be worth their price tags because they're getting out onto the open market and the prices are getting crazy because they're getting into these bidding wars, right? It's why the Patriots just paid Jonnu Smith what they just paid Jonnu Smith. Is Jonnu Smith really a $12 million tight end? No, but he's a $12 million tight end in unrestricted free agency. So if I'm the Pats, I'm wary of people like that. I'd much rather them go in the veteran trade market for a guy, for example, like a Calvin Ridley, who's obviously out there, or a player like that, or draft a guy. I saw some questions about the draft. We can start to talk about that a little bit here. And I was absolutely shocked, Alex, when Todd McShay did his mock draft. I don't know which version of it is, but it came out.
It had to be one.
He drafted Kyler Gordon, the cornerback from Washington, who is a talented guy. I think he's a good player, but he drafted him ahead of Chris Olave. He had the Patriots passing on Chris Olave, and I think they passed on Jameson Williams too to draft Kyler Gordon. If Chris Olave is there for the Pats in the first round at 21, I just have a really hard time envisioning how you can justify passing on a player of that caliber. I mean, he is everything that they need and more at that position. Pure route runner, explosive off the line of scrimmage, can run from multiple alignments, inside, outside, put him wherever you want. He is what they thought that they were hoping that they were going to get. And I think they wanted to draft Justin Jefferson. Right. I think that he would have been their pick if he had lasted to their pick. He goes to Minnesota the pick before they trade out of the pick. A couple years before that, Calvin Ridley was a question on the board, him versus Isaiah Wynn. They went with Isaiah Wynn. That seems to be like the golden goose that they've been chasing, are those explosive route running technicians like Jefferson, like Ridley. I think Olave fits exactly in that mold.
Yeah, I haven't been talking a lot about Chris Olave just because I don't see how he's on the board at 21. Yeah. I just don't see how it happens. If he's there, and I've said this about Jordan Davis too, if he's there, he's the pick. I think Olave more so than Davis. Those would be the two guys if they fall, maybe could fall. Yeah, Olave is exactly what they need. You talk about getting more explosion out of that Z spot. I think that's Olave.
Yeah, he's a really interesting prospect to me. I would assume that they're going to get to the combine if he does run at the combine, which I think he probably will. If he runs in the low 4.4s, then he's not going to be on the board, right? Which I think is what is probably going to end up happening. Is he's going to be one of those guys that runs us. He's fast on tape, but I don't know how fast. We have to find out how fast he truly is, right? And when he puts up a 4.41 or a 4.42, I think everybody's opinions on him are going to be like, all right, this is a top 20 player in this class, and he's going to be gone. We got to shout out our friends at LinkedIn here. Oh, now we got graphics on graphics and everything at the bottom of the screen. There we go. LinkedIn, LinkedIn.com/beat. It's a new year, but it's feeling harder than ever to find and hire the qualified people you need, especially for small businesses. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. They make it easier to find the people you want, to talk to faster and for free. Create a free job in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 770 million people. Focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience and use screening questions to get your role in front of only the most qualified. Then use the simple tools on LinkedIn Jobs to quickly filter and prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/beat. That's linkedin.com/beat to post your job for free. And now that we're through that, we can get into some more of these questions as the fire alarm decides to go off in my apartment building.
Do you need to go?
No, this happens like once a week. How loud is it?
It's kind of loud, but if do you live on the ground floor at least?
Yeah, the second floor. I'll be fine. Let's talk about some big-bodied wide receivers in this draft, Alex. Alex is very concerned. It's all right. Atlas will tell me if there's actually a fire. The Patriots did meet with some big body guys at the combine. At the Senior Bowl. Very distracting. At the Senior Bowl, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, another big body receiver that the Patriots met with. This is going to be all sorts of fun. Alex, why don't you take it from here? Christian Watson, I kind of like Christian Watson. I know that people are going to read his draft bio. They're going to see 6'3", 6'4". They're going to be super concerned. Oh boy, that's another N'Keal Harry, another Chad Jackson. But he's a smooth guy. He runs well. He's got loose hips. He can change directions. He can run with the football in his hands. He was a really fun study.
Yeah, why don't you mute yourself too while I'm talking here? Watson to me isn't really N'Keal because he's got like a reported 4.41, 4.42, something like that. He ran at school, so no, he's a burner. The thing with Watson and both guys they talked to at the Senior Bowl are pretty similar. It was Watson and then Romeo Doubs of Nevada. They're either deep threats or screen guys. Either get the ball in their hands at the line of scrimmage and let them create with the ball in their hands. You send them down the field. Doubs is 6'2", Watson 6'5", and they're both very, very good jump ball receivers with speed, right? So they're true legitimate deep threats. There's just not much in the intermediate game. Doubs a little more polished than Watson. He's a projected 3rd round pick right now. Watson is 4th to 5th. But that's kind of, you talk about adding a dynamic the Patriots don't have. They have a lot of good intermediate receivers. Jacoby Myers, Kendrick Bourne, Hunter Henry. So adding a guy that's kind of all or nothing, right? Either take the screen at the line of scrimmage or run a go. They don't have a guy like that. So, I think they're both Doubs and Watson are worth watching. They're both guys that you're going to need to watch at the combine. Pro days are going to be interesting. Like, look, Watson's still pretty raw. And just as a receiver in general, Doubs is better. He's got better hands. But I don't know that he's quite the route run. He's a good route runner. I don't know that he's quite the route runner they'll want him to be right away. But those guys are both players to watch. So like in my mock that I did, 985thesportsup.com, you can find it. It's actually my pinned tweet as well right now. So I had them taking John Mechie and then taking Doubs. And that, I think, is where you look at those guys, where if they draft a Chris Olave, if they draft John Mechie, if they go out, they sign Chris Godwin, then adding that guy as a complementary piece is a really good move. I don't know that either one of those guys is the guy you draft outright as like the answer. And as for Treylon Burks, it's the nature versus nurture thing. I think Burks has a lot of fascinating upside, but we just saw them go through this with N'Keal Harry. Can they develop that prototype of wide receiver? Well, they couldn't do it last time around, and now the coaching staff is kind of on rocky footing. I don't trust them to get the most out of him as opposed to a guy like Olave, even a guy like Jahan Dotson, who I just think is more their kind of player and they would just be able to work with better.
Okay, so this fire alarm is not stopping, so I'm just going to power through it here for a second. Christian Watson, you mentioned a lot of really good things about him. The one thing I wanted to add to it was I watched him at North Dakota State. They used him out of the backfield. Like, this is a player that they handed the ball off to in a running back role. Now, I'm not saying he's Deebo Samuel. I'm not saying he's going to carry the ball 10, 15 times a year, but he literally was taking handoffs, right? And that was really impressive. The other thing that I would mention about this group, Treylon Burks, really, really concerns me with the Patriots for a lot of reasons. The main reason being, I don't want to get all analytical on you, Alex, but I'm going to do it here for a second. His average depth of target was below 10 yards at the college level. Everything that he did was either over the top or it was at the line of scrimmage, right? And when that is the case, you have concerns, right? You worry about his ability to develop the rest of his route tree. He is a really explosive player. I don't think he's a lot faster and more explosive than somebody like N'Keal Harry, but it's not quite as much as I would like to see in terms of his route running ability. I think he's the guy that's going to win on screens and scheme touches behind the line of scrimmage or verticals down the field. And I think that they've already struck out on enough of those guys.
I would agree. This show's completely off the rails. I would agree on that.
We're going to power through it. All right. We're going to do this.
I thought it went away.
No. This is going to go on for a little while. All right. Chase Winovich. I think this is a good question. Do they trade Chase Winovich? Can they find a partner for to trade Chase Winovich to? I think is probably a better question. But I do think at this point for Chase, for the Patriots, it's probably in their best interest to move on, right? I don't think he's a fit here. And I think maybe there's a better opportunity for him elsewhere and vice versa.
Yeah, we've talked about it. Part of the problem with they draft all these edge guys, they don't play. They just don't. They've been stuck behind Vinoy and Judon, and last year stuck behind John Simon. And you got to play players to develop them. That's the reality of it. Winovich is somebody who fits in that category. Josh Uche is somebody who fits in that category. I kind of thought, even before they took him last year, Ronnie Perkins was kind of a redshirt sort of player. But now in year 2, you got to play him. You got to have reps for him. So you have this logjam. You got to start thinning it out. I think there would be some value in Chase Winovich. I think he's shown enough that you could get something for him. Maybe an early day 3 pick, something like that. Look, they don't have a ton of picks this year. They only have 6 picks. So I could see them exploring something like that. I am interested to see what Ronnie Perkins can do. And I think they need to be interested in what Ronnie Perkins can do too. I don't think you can just sit him on the bench. Again, like you have with Uche and Winovich, I think you got to put him out there and see what he can do.
Yeah, we're at the point here with these day 2 linebacker picks, whether they're on the ball linebackers, outside linebackers, or inside linebackers. You have Uche, Jennings, McGrone, Ronnie Perkins.
McGrone's different. He's hurt.
Right, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like at some point you got to get these guys on the field and see what they can do. And I think that Chase Winovich is in that same category, but maybe they've already seen what he can do. He's decent already in the Patriots system. I'm not sure if he's the answer here, but Mike Reese threw this out here today as an analysis on ESPN. What gives with these day 2 guys, right? Why are these we're talking about 2 of them here in Winovich and Ronnie Perkins. Is it development? Is it talent evaluation and player development combined? What's the situation here? Because they've drafted 4 or 5 of these guys in the last couple of drafts, and none of them have really ascended to being full-time players or big-time producers or playmakers for the Patriots defense.
And I just think you got to figure out a way to get them on the field. I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. And look, there was a portion of the year last year where Matthew Judon and Kyle Van Noy were playing so well that the snaps just weren't there. But this year you have a chance to thin that out. Just don't add somebody to the logjam, right? I think they can maybe figure out. There might be an odd man out, whether it's Winovich or Anthony Jennings, but I think they can make it work with who they have now. But they have to want to make it work.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everybody wondering, this is not the fire alarm in my apartment. This is the apartment fire alarm, like the building. So there's nothing I can do about it, unfortunately.
Isaiah, like 10 seconds away from like some firefighter breaking into your apartment. Just keep you off on his shoulder.
Somebody burnt popcorn or something. Isaiah Wynn. We've talked about trading Isaiah Wynn quite a few times. I say that so nonchalantly, like, oh, just change this entire guy's life. But Isaiah Wynn, another guy, 5th-year option, due almost $11 million. I wonder if the Patriots could pull off an NBA, MLB style trade and ship Isaiah Wynn, Chase Winovich, and a pick to Atlanta for Calvin Ridley, for example, right? And try to incentivize that trade package so you don't necessarily have to give up your first-round pick for Calvin Ridley by maybe throwing in some of these guys that have some talent but aren't necessarily panning out here.
I think it's something you have to look at, and it's a good tackle draft. And if you bring Trent Brown back, you have Brown and Owen. Look, there's a lot of unknowns here, is actually what I should say, because, how do they view Wynn? Is he a guy they believe that they will pay long-term? And whether they should or not is another conversation, but do they think they'd pay Wynn long-term? Are they going to bring Trent Brown back? Are they going to bring back 1 year, multiple years?
Alex.
Is it off? All right.
It's off. There we go. Keep going.
Are they going to bring Brown back for 1 year, for multiple years? How do they view Mike Onwenu? Do they view him as a tackle or as a guard? There's, what's Ted Karras' status? There's so many moving pieces on the offensive line, and ultimately they have at least 4 starting caliber players coming back. So they're in good shape. Excuse me again, but they need to, you need to pick a path, right? They need to pick a path. And I think trading Wynn is an interesting one. You need to be able to do some other things. Again, what is Trent Brown going to stay for a team-friendly deal? I think they would do it. Would he do it, or is he going to want to go get paid again, which he has every right to? So that's a trade that has to happen right before the draft, because I think there's other questions that need to be answered. And it sucks because one of them that we just won't know the answer to until the summer is, Do they view Michael Onwenu as a tackle or a guard? He played guard in college, comes out last year, plays tackle by necessity, is amazing. They tried putting him at guard this year. It didn't work out so well. They seemed pretty committed to it. I think he's a tackle. I think that's the best use of the asset is keep him a tackle. But they've got to they got to make that decision, I think, this year. And it screws with his development too. You can't keep bouncing him back and forth. Shout out for the USFL question.
I have a few Alex Barth questions I want to get to here before we wrap up. But as we're talking about this, and we're talking about Calvin Ridley, Mike Williams was brought up earlier in the chat as well. I do find the angle of the first round pick that the Patriots didn't have the ability to draft at the time, Bill going out and getting a guy that they had rated extremely highly, right? Like, I don't know what their eval or their grade was on Mike Williams in his draft in 2019. Now that would be the 19 draft, 18 draft, somewhere around there.
Yeah, sounds right.
I don't know what they thought of him back then, but when you look from the back of history, really, for Bill, until basically last year, I would say, when they broke all their rules, right? They just went crazy and broke all their rules. The one guy that you always stand out that says, oh, this was a huge free agent signing for the Patriots and a surprise, was Stephon Gilmore. And Gilmore was, I think, the 10th pick in his draft. He was up there. He was a top 10, top 15 guy. The Patriots are picking at the back of the draft during the Brady era at the time. It is an interesting conversation of, they tend to like those types of guys, right? They tend to like the first round guys. Hey, the guys that they can go and they can buy low on, like a Calvin Ridley, or even like a linebacker. A name that I've kind of thought about a little bit is Leighton Vander Esch, right? Is somebody that could have been a fit in that draft, but they didn't end up going that route, or they weren't able to pick him because he wasn't available. I do like that angle of it a little bit. And Isaiah Wynn is one of these guys that maybe you ship off and you make right on that draft. Not saying Isaiah Wynn's been a terrible player for them, but I don't think it's panned out exactly how you would hope a top 25 pick in the draft would at a left tackle position. So it's a really interesting, last year aside, I think you got to throw that out because last year doesn't count. They did all sorts of things that broke a lot of tendencies for them. In terms of what they typically pay for, it's that premier talent at the top of the first round that they weren't necessarily going to be able to get in the draft.
Yeah, sorry, you actually cut out there for a second. Say that last part again. Yeah, the show's going so well.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. The premier talent at the top of the draft that does ultimately hit free agency, like a Mike Williams, somebody along those lines, are typically the guys that they target in free agency.
Right. Well, can I tell you who I'm worried? It's a different position, but can I tell you who I'm worried they're going to sign?
Yes.
Eli Apple.
Oh, you think?
It would be, I mean, he's a big physical corner.
His attitude stinks.
One-time first-round pick. They're going to think they can fix him. I could so see them bringing him back on short money.
I guess, yeah. I mean,
it's just funny you brought that line of thinking up, because that's what I've been thinking with Eli Apple. Here's a former first round, not that long ago was a first round pick, 2016, stock in the absolute basement. That's where they like to strike.
Oh my gosh. Okay. This is the Alex Barth question of the entire draft cycle for 2020.
It might be of the entire offseason. I know what you're going with this.
The entire offseason, the entire draft, the entirety of his Patriots coverage on 98.5 thesportshub.com is going to be surrounded by this question, Alex. Will the Patriots trade Jake Bailey and draft Matt Araiza at punter? You tell me that this punter is Ray Guy 2.0, right?
He's better.
He's better than Ray Guy, who's the consensus best punter of all time.
Go watch.
Ray Guy is the Tom Brady of punting.
Ray Guy said he's better.
All right, give me your take. Is this going to happen?
Yeah, he's a legitimate weapon. He's a legitimate, 51 yards per kick, NCAA record, 6 kicks over 60 yards, 2 kicks over 80 yards, both downed inside the 15-yard line, neither one returned. I mean, come on. The guy, like, if Al Davis was still alive, he'd be a first-round pick. I genuinely believe that. And Evan, have you even just watched him? Not even like tape, just highlights?
I've seen on my Twitter feed. I've definitely seen some Matt Araiza bombs. Yes.
So you understand, like, this isn't another punting prospect. This guy is different.
So let me ask you a question.
Real quick shout out to PFF, who added special teamers, just kickers and long snappers, didn't add punters, and now is adding punters one at a time, but hasn't done Araiza yet. They're just trying to torture me. Anyway, your question.
Okay, so let me ask you a question though, because one of my favorite days on the beat early on, I was in Detroit for joint practices with the Patriots and Lions. I sat next to Matt Chatham the entire practice, and we just talked football the entire time.
Yeah.
He obviously played a lot on special teams and in the kicking game. He knows all about punters, kickers, all of it. He knows what everybody's assignments are and everything. He was talking about Jake Bailey, who was a rookie at the time, and he said the concern that you have with guys that are big-legged punters like a Jake Bailey is that they either drive it 350 yards or they shank it. There's no in between, right? There's no feel or touch on the football. There's no coffin corner punt. There's not that much of that, but they can bomb it 75 yards. Bailey does have he has some different clubs in the bag, right? He can do some different things. But does Matt Araiza have the leg of a god, or does he have the entire repertoire as a punter?
No, I mean, he's precise. He's precise. Again, he had, for as strong as his leg is, I forget how many touchbacks he had. I'll have to look it up. It's not a lot. And by the way, he studies Jake Bailey. So this is another reason, Evan, you'll like him, is he uses a lot of math and analytics to figure out the way he wants to punt.
Who's the golfer that everybody hates that does that?
Bryson DeChambeau.
I thought it was DeChambeau. Yeah.
So there's some similarity there, and he studies a lot of Jake Bailey because similar leg power, similar height, weight, all of that. So it's not something I'm worried about with him.
Yeah.
The other thing is, when you invest in gunners like the Patriots do, it's not something you worry about as much. So you have the best gunners. You have guys who can fly down the field and get there. So going back to the original question, would they move on from Bailey? Well, only one punter since the mid-'80s has played for the Patriots under 2 consecutive contracts. And that was Ryan Allen. He got his contract extended midway through his rookie year. They then moved on from him to get Bailey, Bailey's probably, I mean, Araiza's I've been saying it wrong this whole time. Meanwhile, Araiza's probably the best punting prospect since Bailey. So last time there was a guy this good, they broke the mold and went out and got him. And
how much better is he though? Like how? And we've spent a lot of time on this punter.
He's really good. There are people who say he would be the best punter in the NFL right now. Okay. And the other thing about it is Jake Bailey's cap hit is the second largest of any punter in the league. They save almost $4 million. It's 3.9 something if they cut him or trade him. So that's not an insignificant number.
No.
So it makes sense for them to move on with Bailey to begin with. They could extend him, but at the same time, well, if there's a generational punting prospect,
yes,
why not go get? And by the way, kicks field goals too. Really good kicker. So I don't. To me, if they don't get Araiza, it's because he went higher. It's because he went off the board before they were picking.
So the interesting thing that you just said to me, 2 things. One, I mentioned does he just have the big leg and no other clubs in the bag? Because I think what we saw last year, and Jake Bailey was dealing with some injuries and things like that. But I think what we saw last year was that when those big-legged punters get out of a rhythm, they can shank the ball. Like they can get into a little bit of a funk and not be able to produce at the same level. I don't want to see the same exact thing happen with a guy like Araiza, who maybe just doesn't has an off year, has an off couple weeks, gets him out of his rhythm. It's, I'm sure, a very rhythmic position, right? It's just like a golfer. Once your swing gets out of whack, your swing's out of whack, and it's difficult to get it back into form. The other thing I would mention, you just mentioned these field goals. So Bailey kicks off. I'm sure Araiza could do that too.
Yeah, he kicked
How
off
good
for
of a
San
field
Diego
goal
State.
kicker are we talking? Because I think in a dream world now, punters hold nowadays, right? Because of the rules in practice, in the limited practice amount of practice time, they have punters hold. So Araiza can't hold for himself. So I guess that does present a little bit of a domino effect if he is the kicker and the punter. But I've always wondered if Bill Belichick would be the guy that would finally have one guy do both to save the roster spot. But maybe I just answered my own question with the holder issue.
Well, so what you could do in theory is you have, because the issue is the reason the backup quarterback doesn't hold anymore is you can't, like, the offense is practicing at the same time they're kicking.
Right.
So what you would need to have is a dedicated or third quarterback or a dedicated special teamer.
Right.
If they were to just say, hey, Gunner's just going to be a returner. We're not going to have him be a part of the offense. He's just a returner. And he was the backup holder last year. We saw them go through this.
Yeah.
If you just wrote off Gunnar and said he's not going to practice with the offense, we're not going to use him on offense, it just is what it is, then you could have Gunnar hold and you would be out of that issue. That would be, and I don't know that they would do it, but that would be the way you do it. By the way, the one other number, so I found the touchback number here. This is among FBS punters in terms of yards per punt. So Matt Araiza, again, led NCAA record 51.47 yards per punt. In 73 punts, he had 14 touchbacks. The next closest punter, 58 punts, 11 touchbacks. So that's, 12 more punts and 3 more touchbacks for Araiza.
We just spent 10 minutes on a punter. That's Patriots beat. We dig in deeper than anybody else, and you're going to get 10 minutes of punter talk on this podcast. You'll find that no place else.
There are people in the kicking community who believe the way, because so Araiza was a soccer player, didn't want to play football, became a field goal kicker. He only started punting last year. And so he's self-taught. And again, the way he did it was studying Jake Bailey and using a lot of math to figure out the most efficient way to kick the ball. There's people in the kicking community who believe this is the future of how punters will develop. Okay. Like people who think he's legitimately going to change the game. So you like the analytics. I like the punting. I think this is the guy. I think this is the guy that
this is a perfect guy for both of us. We can agree on both sides of it
in the last 10 minutes.
Right. Okay. A couple of things to end here. Also, Alex, you mentioned this to me today when we were texting about it. You were very disappointed that Araiza was not added to the PFF mock draft simulator. Somebody in the chat is saying that he is now added.
I'm checking right now.
Check and see if that's the case. I'll bring up this question about Dante Fowler. I don't like Dante Fowler necessarily for the Patriots, but I want to talk about this in general from this rush linebacker perspective, because yesterday, I think it was yesterday, ESPN published an article about free agency. Your boy's on the mock draft simulator now.
And by the way, they have him ranked 159.
There you go.
So that would be
fifth round.
Fourth round, yeah.
Yeah.
So there we go.
Yeah. Okay,
so the PFF mock now.
Dante Fowler is now a free agent. He was released by Atlanta. I don't love the fit for him here. But ESPN also mentioned Chandler Jones as a potential Patriot target in free agency, a Kyle Van Noy situation, or, whatever comparison you want to use, bringing him back now. I find it interesting that they mentioned Chandler Jones. The Patriots already have a rush linebacker. His name's Matthew Judon. They have a couple of backup rush linebackers too. Josh Uche, Chase Winovich, those types of guys. It doesn't seem to me like players like Fowler and Chandler Jones, are you going to play two of those guys at the same time on either end of the line? Yeah, you can rush the passer really effectively. I don't think you're going to be so disciplined or so great against the run, but you might rack up sack totals with both those guys as bookend edge rushers. But how do you feel about Fowler? How do you feel about a reunion with Chandler Jones? Again, I don't know if they have a spot for those guys, given the fact that Judon is going to play a ton.
Yeah, so it would be really fun if you had Matt Judon coming off one edge and Chandler Jones coming off the other. That's just they've never schemed it that way. One guy's the
third and 11, right? Situation like that.
But is Chandler Jones coming here to play situationally? Is Matthew Judon going to take a decreased situational role? They don't really have much of an offense for those two guys on a defense for those two guys on the field at the same time, because they like to have one guy's pass rusher, the other guy's going to set the edge and help against the run. That's Judon and Van Noy, right? So it would be fun. It's just they'd have to rework their entire defense to make it happen, and they're not going to pay Chandler Jones what they need to pay him to rework their entire defensive system to put him on. I just don't see it. It'd be fun. It would be fun, but it's not schematically how it works.
So when Matthew Judon was doing his press tour during Super Bowl week, he was on Felger and Maz. He was on a couple of different programs here locally. Everybody was prying him on the coaching staff, right? What's the situation between Gerard Mayo and Steve Belichick? Do you guys like those two guys? Do you guys know who's in charge? Those types of things. But I thought the most interesting thing that he said was once things started to unravel for the Patriots at the end of last year, that guys were out for themselves. They just went out there and tried to make plays, right? And tried to kind of leave the scheme and take over because they just wanted to turn the tide. I think he was talking about himself, quite frankly, right? Because we talked about this a lot on the podcast, that Matthew Judon towards the end of the season was kind of out for his, right? He was going out there just to try to get sacks. He was running the arc. He was running past quarterbacks. He was letting go of the edge. When they're undisciplined in this Bill Belichick scheme out on the edge, the whole thing comes crumbling down. It's such a big part of the way that they rush the passer, defend the run. All of it is setting a firm edge, being disciplined out there. You add guys like Dante Fowler and Chandler Jones, and with Matthew Judon, you're going to have a lot of guys ending up 10, 11 yards past, running past the quarterback, right?
Right. And that's not what they want.
That's not what they want. They need somebody, whether it's Kyle Van Noy coming back and having a strong season, a draft pick like Ronnie Perkins emerging. They need somebody on the other side of Judon that's going to set a strong side edge. It's going to be able to do it. Kyle Van Noy actually did it pretty consistently for most of the year last year. Obviously, everybody kind of let go of the rope late in the season, but for the first 10, 11, 12 games, Van Noy was pretty solid. I think that he could add something, but he could also add $4 million in cap space if they release him. So that's another one that we can talk about. Let's end it there. We talked a lot about Matt Araiza for Alex. He got him on his PFF mock draft simulator. So now he's just going to take him in every single mock draft under the sun that he does moving forward.
I usually have a rule on my mock drafts because I think it's all about learning what players are on the board where. Right. I usually have a rule in my mock drafts. I don't take a player twice. In 2 separate mock drafts in an offseason.
Yeah.
I might break that rule this year. I really might. Is that good?
Yes, I did fight through the fire alarm for about 15 minutes in this podcast. We got through it, though. We did it. And we will be back on Tuesday. We're going to talk some more about the same things that we're talking about. Hopefully, we'll have some new information and be able to bring you guys some new info on the Patriots offensive coordinator, offensive coaching staff situation, free agent targets, draft targets. And then we're going to do mock drafts here soon. We're hoping that PFF, now that they have Araiza on there, maybe Alex, we can finally start to do a mock draft next week.
Well, the issue is figuring out the comp picks, and they have the Sony Michel trade weird. They have it because remember originally it was like a conditional 5th based on a comp pick, and then the league said you can't do that, and they had to rework it. Right. So they need to update. They still have it based on the original conditional pick. They need to update that. Okay, once they do that, we're good to go.
Yeah, the pick order is difficult right now, especially without the comp picks. You don't really know.
Now we got to see if they added Christian Watson.
Oh, my gosh. All right. Well, we'll figure that out, but we'll be back on the show on Tuesday. We're going to stick with this Tuesday, Thursday schedule throughout the offseason, so we're not going anywhere here on Patriots Beat. We'll do a bunch of Q&As. We'll do mock drafts. We'll keep it fresh. We'll keep it exciting here in the offseason, and we got a lot to talk about here with the draft and free agency coming up. The Combine is March 1st through the 7th. So we're almost at that point when there should be not only draft talk, obviously, but also a lot of rumors come out at the Combine, and we start to figure out some of these free agent markets and things like that. So that'll be exciting too. But until Tuesday, signing off for Alex Barth, aka the #1 fan in the Matt Araiza fan club, I'm Evan Lazar. We'll see you guys on Tuesday.